Thank you. Urooj served on the Australia Lesbian Foundation for Social Justice Board. She is a recipient of the National Association of Asian American Professional Pride Award, the Latino GLBT History Project Award, the National Queer API Alliance Community Catalyst Award, and the Young Women of Color HIV/AIDS Coalition Award. Urooj served on the US delegation to the 59th session of United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. Welcome, my queer Baji from Washington, DC. And lastly, Anum Awan is an interaction designer and new media artist who crafts mixed reality experiences by blending physical and digital media. Their new media practice centers on queer, immigrant, and non-Western narratives, and this work manifests as installations, projections, videos, live visuals, and programmed electronics. Anum grew up in Lahore, Pakistan, and moved to the United States in 2008. It's lovely to see you on and off the dance floor here in the Bay. I will be your moderator. I'm Shenaaz Janmohamed, and I'm the founder and director of QueerCrescent, which is a US-based nonprofit organization that imagines futures where LGBTQI plus Muslims are building possibilities towards collective liberation. Our work is shaped by resisting gendered violence through cultural organizing, base building, and holding a racialized definition of Muslimness that is both expansive and self-determined. I also want to recognize the expansive, speaking of expansive, the expansive team of folks that made tonight possible. Gina Ali, our Healing Justice Fellow, Dalia Magoob, our comms extraordinaire, Rafa Kadvai from our core team helping with tech, as well as Vivek Avasata. Of course, Masjid and their financial support, as well as Hidayah with their support of the workbook. Thank you all so much. This is truly a community effort. So welcome everybody. Happy spring. Let's begin with a little bit of an icebreaker to quell our hearts and to catch our breaths. That was very emotional. So what is sheer Qorma anyway? And do you have a memory of your first time eating it?
Go ahead, Anum.
Okay. Yeah. I was so curious about the title of this film, because when I first heard it, I was like, sheer Qorma, like it's like a play on words, like sweet and salty. Because in my head, I was like, Qorma is like salan, but then I'm like, maybe it's sheer Qorma, and maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. And so I'm like, maybe in different parts it's called different things, but in terms of sheer Qorma, I don't remember the first time that I had it, but it's one of those things that goes back as far as I can remember, and always eating it around Eid and eating it at my own house and literally like every other house that we went to on Eid. But I had a little bit of a complicated relationship with it because I loved it, but I don't really like cardamom or pistachios or like cashews and almonds. I like cashews and almonds now, but when I was a kid, I just didn't. So it was like really challenging especially when we go to other people's houses.
I would say.
I know. I can't believe I'm just outing myself like with all of these things right now, but yeah, it was difficult. Like when we'd go to other people's houses where they usually want to serve you, and so they just put it in my bowl, and I'd be like sitting there making eyes at my mom, like, please come here and eat this, and she'd be making eyes at me like, no, shut up, you eat it. And every time I got it without all the toppings, it was the best thing ever.
And I think I was also confused. I had to Google because I also was confused between sheer Qorma and Qorma, and it's like, it's not the meat one. I think for me, Eid, I grew up in Karachi, and Eid is definitely one of my most magical times that I remember being there, especially with my dad, who passed soon after we immigrated to the US. So I just have a lot of memories of like my mom would, cook really sweet, beautiful dishes. And so that would be my memory of it's all kind of tied to Eid and celebration.
Yeah, interesting fact is I went to India with my family soon after the Gujarat riots and the pogrom against Muslim folks. So what was that, like 2002, 3? And at the time, somehow we came across slang of mita chao, which was like slang for queer people. And so mita chao has been like this term that has been used in my family, mostly with me and my mom. And in fact, when like she kind of like first told me that she knew I was queer, she's like, so tell me, are you mita chao? And it was just like this really sweet moment. And so when I saw this film, I was like, oh yeah, other people have random dishes to talk about like queerness. So I was really appreciative of that. So off top, what are your hot takes? How's your heart? What are your first reactions to the film?
I mean, it's the first time I've seen it. I have obviously, I've come across, you know, the previews and name of it, and I always wanted to see it. And I said to myself, I'm not gonna cry. I'm gonna try not to cry, but it was pretty impossible. And even just my heart skipped a beat when I heard non-binary. You know, my partner is non-binary, and just anytime there is a way for our realities to come together like this, it feels shocking, you know, and especially in the world that we navigate every day that doesn't. So yeah, it's so sweet. And you know, huge fan of Shabana Azmi. Grew up watching, my parents loved watching art Bollywood or art films, and she was a big, you know, name, and just seeing even her performing in this queer, and she's done some other queer work in some other queer films, and it's just, yeah, it's beautiful. It just feels like everything comes together.
Yeah, my heart is good. I really tried to keep it together while watching it because I wanted to be able to participate on this panel and speak coherently. So I may have suppressed some feelings, but we're good. I think, yeah, it felt heavy, it felt tender, it felt sweet, like a lot of different things at the same time. And the food looked really amazing. I'm definitely very excited for my next meal now. And it also reminded me how, as queer people or as queer Muslims, there's just this constant baseline of proving like the most basic thing ever, like this is not a sin. And even getting past that is such a challenge and such a hurdle. But it's so important to move past that to start building anything beyond that. And everyone's obsession with like sin.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think this film is so rich. It covers so much ground in such a short amount of time. Like the amount of emotions that it produces in just over 35 minutes, I think is such a testament to Faraz's storytelling. And while my coworker Gina and Ali and I were previewing the film last week, Gina remarked how it gives us a taste of what family love and transformation could feel like. To be fully embraced in our wholeness, the film then serves as a possibility map for LGBTQI plus Muslims. We see the experiences of being pushed out and navigating emotional exile, which cuts across cultures, all cultures, and is too often experienced by LGBTQI youth, often resulting in houselessness and leading to street economies and vulnerability to violence. The film also reviews the various family roles and how they can potentially play out. We see the choice points and junctures of the sibling as he works up the courage to be a stronger ally, to no longer engage what I like to call straight keeping, to risk his own privilege and standing within the family unit that reward his heteronormativity, to pursue being a stronger ally to his sibling. And then we see the mother isolated and struggling on her own to make sense of how to reconcile societal pressures that uphold the binary gender assumptions and patriarchal notions of love. And then finally, I mean, just at the beginning of the film, we see that painful invisibility of queer love in the face of heteropatriarchy. In that opening scene, it's just like, it just registers so deep from the very first scene. So my next question is, how do these narratives and the narratives offered in Sheer Qorma as this possibility map relate to your own experiences as queer Muslims navigating family dynamics? And what sustains you through this ever-evolving journey?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many pieces in it that resonate. I mean, this is a sort of a truncated snapshot of what a possibility could look like. In my own life, it's taken decades. Initially, when my family immigrated from Pakistan and I came out in a really white space, I didn't see the possibility of family and queerness at all. And that's kind of what propelled me into understanding myself as a person of color and connecting and understanding myself in a white supremacist, understanding white supremacy, in that context. And I ended up being outed to my mom. And over time, and she didn't really understand, if you don't have the language, how do you talk about it if there isn't, in Urdu, for example, at least accessibility at that time for me. Everything that I had was in a white American context. And so it took a long time. And actually one of my brothers outed me repeatedly, and eventually my mom figured it out and she pulled the Quran out. I mean, it was the most dramatic, it was super dramatic. And after that, I kind of decided to, not really talk about my queer life, and kind of just had these two different realities that I constantly navigated, which I know is true for so many people in the LGBTQ Muslim community, which is, partly the work that, especially when I was first coming out and meeting people like Faisal, I'm gonna call you out. I know you're here, and some of our old elders who were organizing. And at that point, I mean, even thinking about, there are 100 people here right now. And, when Faisal tells the story of the first time queer Muslims met, it was 4 people and they hadn't met each other. And that was the first meeting, right? So it's been a journey, both sort of in our community and for me personally. And as I was creating my own space, the importance of chosen family, that was huge for me. I mean, saved my life. And eventually, very recently, I mean, this is like, we're talking about like 2 decades. It's only very recently in the last 5 years that I've been able to reconcile with my mom fully. And part of it has been my journey with other queer Muslims, understanding that I am part of the Muslim community, that somehow I'm not outside of it just because I'm queer, which I think is a narrative that we're told from the, a lot of times the mainstream Muslim spaces. And also going back to Pakistan and connecting to the community there and finding the language, finding a voice in my, in the Pakistani context. And so my mom came and visited my partner and I a few times, and, met my partner's family. And it just, feels kind of incredible that that has been possible. So a lot of that in this story resonated, and having another brother who's an ally, I mean, that makes a huge difference. Yeah, it's incremental, and, it's never linear. Coming out and community, but I feel lucky that I'm in a place where I can talk about reconciliation with my mom.
Yeah, a lot of that really resonates. I'm maybe earlier in my journey, but I think the experience is similar in many ways. It's just complicated and challenging to navigate coming from a Muslim family as a queer person. I moved to the US when I was 18, and it was mostly just to be with Queer Chosen Family from Pakistan, who was inviting me out here and, you know, said like, just do it, just come and we're going to be okay. And yeah, here we are. And when I came out to my mom, I was very careful and very intentional in when I let her know. Like I've always been queer, even when I was young and in Pakistan and doing my O levels and A levels and all of that. And it was around when I was 25 that I decided that, okay, I'm going to come out to her and it's going to be on my terms, because I feel like I've made sort of a solid life for myself in the US. I'm independent. And while it was so obvious that I was super gay, the denial was also very, very strong. And so literally I had to say it for her to understand it. And when I told her, and it was more like, you know, this is who I am and you can choose to accept me or not. And it's okay either way, because I'll be okay. And because it's my mom, she did her work to accept me. And it's been like, what, 6 or 7 years now. And we've moved beyond the acceptance into a little bit of celebration now. And so I'm really, really grateful for that. And I also am trying to do my work to be real about it. Like, I don't want to expect that she's going to get it 100%, just like I don't get her 100%. And where we are right now, I think, feels really good to me. What I'm sharing with her is being respected. And, you know, it's okay. Like, I don't need her to give me dating advice or talk about my sex life with her. Like, that's never going to happen. And that's totally fine. And to get to this point with, you know, has required a lot of chosen family and community. It's just been so critical to even be able to feel grounded outside of my immediate family on this foreign land across the world, like where I showed up. And in terms of my siblings, I think my sibling is an amazing ally. And I think I got really lucky because I have a sibling who's 12 years younger than me. And so he ended up being a part of Gen Z. And so he's just like super unfazed about my queerness, and just, you know, it's like, it's sort of a given for him. And I'm really thrilled to see that this next generation is just so queer and so open and so fluid. Even in Pakistan, like, this doesn't feel like a Western thing. And yeah, I feel blessed to be here in the Bay Area, where I think we have a thriving queer Muslim community, and just so much support and so much love.
Love hearing about siblings coming through and just showing up in the ways that they should. I feel like this film also like offers a lot of encouragement to siblings, because I think sometimes siblings don't know how to show up, and it's difficult to do the work to kind of tell them how to show up. And so being able to kind of see things playing out in this film, I think, is really powerful. This next question was actually originally for Faraz, but I think that there's something in it that I want to say to everyone. And then I think that we can redirect and have the question for you all. This film is so intimate. I feel like it's a love letter to our queer Muslim communities. You know, with it, Faraz offers a collective pause on responding to the persistent horrors of globalized Islamophobia, imperialism, and gendered violence, of which queer Muslims sit at the nexus of. This film, as a love letter, is a pause to turn inwards, to have this very intimate conversation about cultural change and cultural shifts within the Muslim communities, right? Like so often we're kind of outward facing, responding to what's happening, and very seldomly do we get to kind of pause and reflect on these really intimate insider conversations, so to speak. So to that end, who do you think needs to see this film? And do you think they will? And how might they react?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like honestly everyone should see it. It portrays such a particular story that's not told very often. And whether you're just queer or just Muslim or both or neither, I feel like it can probably expand everyone's mind just a little bit more. So I really hope that this film continues to be widely seen and recognized by all audiences.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's so nice to be able to, I mean, I think we were talking about this as we were prepping for the panel, to take a break and to have something where there isn't, it's not really, it's sort of meant in a, like, there's a suspension of kind of external, like what are the different audiences that we're always trying to kind of understand, it's kind of like, this is a story, and it's a beautiful, powerful story, and we can celebrate that, and we can, yeah, like it's really important. Like sometimes, on weekends, I'll find myself watching Urdu dramas, for example, because it reminds me of kind of like, they're just meant for a Pakistani audience, and I'm kind of really happy to see that. And I think just having more stories that are sort of for us and by us is it's pretty incredible and powerful. And yeah, absolutely, I think folks should watch it. I would love for my mom to watch it. And I kind of sometimes will, because she loves Bollywood so much, I will try to, find things, and I'm like, here, watch this and tell me what you think. And later, 2 hours later, she's like, oh yeah, that was good. And so I think something like this could be so powerful for a conversation, or and I sometimes find that actually, at least within the Pakistani context, that having a conversation is actually hard, but you can show, and you can kind of, there are other ways, to kind of think about things and to have an understanding. And, even in this film, it's through sheer Qorma, it's through food. And I think that this film is that, it's a way to talk about it without verbally talking about it, because I think that makes it harder, because a lot of times we're not talking the same language.
Yeah, definitely appreciate Shabana Azmi for doing us a solid by being in this film, for sure. That's definitely a way that I can get my mom to watch it. Anum, did you want to respond to that, or should I move on to the next question?
You can move on to the next question.
Okay, cool. So this is specifically, again, for you, Urooj. In your work creating global safety for LGBTQI plus Muslim communities, or not Muslim, just LGBTQI communities. Talk about the intersections of globalized Islamophobia and the righteous struggle for gender justice and body autonomy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of defines the way that I understand myself at the intersections. Growing up in Pakistan, I didn't really identify with Islam. Like, I didn't really think about it. Part of it was because I grew up Sunni and I was privileged, but I also grew up in Karachi, which is extremely, it's a cosmopolitan city. And there were just things that I kind of didn't have to think about in some ways, because I was growing up in a very multicultural space, which, again, one of those things where people are shocked when I talk about Pakistan and in that way. And when I came to the US, I really felt like I needed some distance from Islam, because I was a bit traumatized growing up, and mostly was around a very gendered sense of culture and the way patriarchy showed up, and especially during the 80s, during the Zia-ul-Haq dictatorship, that really changed the course of Islam and Pakistan, kind of conflated it together. And so for me, when 9/11 happened, it was really a moment where I had to really think about who I was. I was 24. I was on a plane going to Miami, and during the moment of 9/11, and by the time I landed in Miami, I was trying to desperately reach my mom, and she worked in a daycare center at a kitchen, and she didn't know if I was okay. And so when I got hold of her, she said, I learned it by these white management people came into her where she was working and said, why are your people doing this to our country? And that's how she found out about 9/11. And that's how, and she said, my daughter is in the air. And I remember being stuck in Miami. I remember the protests at mosque. I mean, it just changed for me you know, my relationship to Islam. And I know that might not be, you know, true for other folks, but for me, it was like, I didn't really feel like I had an option anymore to not, you know, like I really had a moment of reckoning. And I think that also politicized me, you know, in terms of the interventions in Iraq, in Afghanistan, the way it was sold to the American audience, that we were liberating women, and you know, 20 years later, look what happened, right? Like, if that, it was never about that. And not, I mean, it was, yeah, it really politicized me. It made me think about how brown queer people and brown women are used just as an excuse for military interventions, for, and then also like the way that Islamophobia and this idea of gendered Islamophobia, which I think we saw a lot in the response to Orlando, you know, where it was sort of conflated that, oh, you know, this way that the LGBT people versus Muslims. And I know a lot of us, you know, did a lot of work to push back on that and said, we are LGBTQ Muslims and we will not use our stories to be for violence against our own people, you know, even if our own people sometimes, and many times in the mainstream Muslim context, it's been really hard to find our way there too. So it's like we're constantly having to navigate these spaces. And to me, it also goes back to how people understand Pakistan. You know, like I'll travel and people tell me that women in Pakistan cannot get an education. And I'm like, no, that is not accurate. You know, like it's not a monolithic country. And that's why it was really important for me to go back and to find my own community there and to see so much progress that has happened, you know. And for example, there's a transgender law, which is very progressive, that passed in Pakistan a few years ago, that was fought by trans women for a very inclusive space. And it's so inspiring to see them organize and to use an Islamic Muslim South Asian perspective to fight and to talk about their existence and their rights. And I think that when, you know, and then you look here and all of the anti-trans stuff and all the anti-abortion stuff and, you know, the anti-critical race theory. And, you know, it's this way that there is this idea that, oh, we're so progressive in these issues and we're trying to go save these brown folks and these Black folks. And it's like, actually, can you, you know, we also, you know, we can talk about colonization and the impact of that on in our countries as well. And so to me, it's just all of these things that I think about. And for me, it always comes back to, you know, we need to connect to our own stories if possible. And to me, that really helps. It grounds me. Like when my first trip to Pakistan in 2012, so that was 10 years ago, when I actively sought community there and I talked in Urdu about my sexuality, it just changed everything for me. And I think that I hope for that for everyone, you know, that the decolonial way of understanding ourselves, despite however people might think of us.
Yeah, I love that self-determined identity, right? Like self-determination in claiming a Muslimness that feels resonant for you, not that's imposed, not that's like trying to assimilate or like fit in, but like a self-determined, really liberatory idea of what it means to be a queer Muslim. Yeah. I know, and right now with like all this legislation that's like anti-trans, anti-abortion, it's the irony, you know, as like the Christian right like just gets more and more emboldened, and the claims that they, you know, espouse as why justification for imperialist wars are literally the context in which they are creating here in the US. Yeah. Anum, I wanted to turn to you also as an artist. Your art is often about transporting people through a sensory experience, reclaiming and accessing ritual spaces that may not be available to folks due to displacement, distance, safety, and beyond. Tell us about your commitment to bringing cultural spaces to communities and how this shapes your relationship to your queer Muslim identity.
Yeah, that's very well described description of my work and my art, and I think that is totally the purpose of it. I think like from being unable to deal with feelings of nostalgia and longing for places that I don't have access to or places that don't even exist, I decided that I would just sort of recreate them in my own way. And for me, technology has been a really magical tool when it comes to building like transcendent sensorial experiences. I particularly really like to work with projectors because I think that's something that's meant to be experienced in person with a group and on this large scale. So I'm actually very excited that things are opening up again because I'm really not getting what I need through showing my work virtually and asking people to spend more time in front of a screen when everyone is just like collectively feeling so screened out. Um, and I spend a lot of time thinking about all of the harm caused by technology, but I also embrace the flip side of it being really powerful in being able to bring us together and facilitate certain types of experiences. So for instance, in terms of my work, I created a Sufi shrine in a gallery a few years ago. And instead of it being in honor of a saint, as Sufi shrines typically are, and the saints are usually men, mine was about honoring Pakistani women, cis and trans, who we've lost and we continue to lose all the time to violence. And it was, yeah, it was really beautiful. And in other more recent work, I've started to build Islamic architecture through 3D modeling. And that process just really allows me to sit with and get lost in all these beautiful details of architecture, which I normally would have never focused in on if it wasn't for this work that I'm doing. And so even though I'm building like a really like small section of a pillar that's, you know, not a important part of like a mosque or a bigger structure, it's still like there's just so much detail and attention that goes into that. And I think it keeps evolving the way that I leverage the tools, and I keep sort of changing the themes, but the central focus always remains around a queer Muslim immigrant experience, because that's what I think I really want to process through my art practice.
It's beautiful. And it makes me think about, that's something that you both have shared tonight, is the importance of telling your story, of connecting through storytelling. And even just carving out the space to do so, right? I think even that's part of the struggle. It's like finding a room inside of like all the oppressive forces that feel so impending and heavy, and to just kind of create the space to share and tell stories is liberatory, is healing, you know? So those are my questions, folks. Do you have questions for each other, for me? I don't know if we have questions from the audience, but yeah, this is a time for you to do what you want to do. Oh, there is a question, but do you have questions for each other?
No, I'm just feeling very grateful to be in space with you all. Yeah, it's the fact that there are 3 LGBTQ Muslim organizations hosting this. I mean, it's beautiful. It's really beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, same. I didn't prepare questions, but oh, sorry. Yeah, but yeah, just feeling really grateful to be here and sharing this space.
There is a question actually for you, Anum. Where can your work be found and seen? Website, Instagram, etc.
I will drop that in the chat.
Awesome. Other questions from the audience? Urooj, I'd just be curious. I'm kind of putting on the spot here because it's not a question that I had prepped, but you know, folks like you and Faisal have been like really like OGs in like the queer Muslim visibility movement, scene, circuit. What's your like? What is it like now seeing, like you said, 3 organizations seeing so much more kind of, I think, visibility, and I hope also organizing within queer Muslim spaces and identity. What's it like for you, having kind of been like a cultural worker and organizer for many moons?
Well, I'm texting with Faisal now. So Faisal, if you want to tell me something, we usually, have our own commentary going. It feels really beautiful. I mean, I think that, and seeing, I think there was a time where if there was anyone that was queer trans Muslim who was out, like we probably knew of them, and we had Obed who just logged off from London, back in the day. I mean, it was sort of like this Canada, London, UK, US, supporting each other in these very, tough times, especially during the war on terror. And, I remember Faisal and some others were some of the first people who came out against the war, and it was not popular opinion, even in the LGBTQ community, right? And I just think that the narrative has really shifted in so many ways. And there are also so many possibilities, and there's so much media work going on. There's so many ways to tell our story. It's really beautiful. I mean, the issues remain. I mean, when I was still at Advocates for Youth and helped form the Muslim Youth Leadership Council, which I think one of the some of the folks here have gone through that, or and one of them, Ramesh, if you're still on, is running that now. And the stories I heard were the same. People would say, I don't feel welcome in the queer spaces on campus, and I don't feel seen in the Muslim spaces. And and I think I do want to acknowledge that the isolation is real too, and it's still very much there. And I think that we need, and even with the LGBTQ Muslim retreats that happened for several years, we saw a lot of that, and how precious that space was for people. And so it feels both. It feels so grateful that there's space, and I just hope that it keeps growing and there's more and more ways to be involved, and not just the one narrative, right? Because my narrative is very much about being a Pakistani queer immigrant woman, and that's one experience. That's and I think it's really important that there are so many more voices and experiences, and it just feels really beautiful, and I hope that it continues. Oh, you're welcome, Ramesh.
There's another question in the chat from Barida, which is, as a queer Muslim immigrant myself, it has taken me 30 years to get to self-awareness, self-acceptance. Any tips on taking on queer Muslim advocacy and leadership?
Shenaaz, I feel like you probably have a really great answer for this one.
Tips on taking on, for me, like, I almost like don't know how to not do this. I feel like I've been that person in my community who's been like, queer Muslims, like kind of like the broken record. It's almost like obsessive. But it's because I what it comes down to for me is I really desire a political home. And I think as a queer Muslim who's like also internationalist, a leftist, like I've really desired to feel a sense of like political belonging and home. Also growing up Shia, like as a marginal Muslim, I've always kind of felt on the outskirts of the kind of dominant Muslim identity. And so the idea of like carving out spaces and creating like a sense of home has, one of the wonderful things that I learned from my parents, my deeply imperfect and beautiful parents, is to create the spaces that you long for. And so I think in terms of like advocacy, it's like finding your people. And in terms of like leadership, I think to the extent that you can follow your spirit, that has really helped. Like, I develop like a relationship with like land and my heart and my body, and I just really try to follow that, and I try to follow my spirit, and I try to be in relationship and accountable to others. And at some point I got to a place where I was willing to take the risk and to take the risk of more visibility and to just try things out. And I'll definitely make mistakes, but to just keep trying, like, and one of my mantras is, you don't know until you know, and then when you know, you do better. And so I think there's like the white supremacist culture tells us that we ought to be perfect and that things need to be just so. But I think when we can really kind of resist that and like kind of decolonize our minds, then it frees up all this creative space to just try things out. And if there's resonance, alhamdulillah, you'll find your people. And if not, you keep it moving, you keep it pushing. And that's all I think we can do, right? That's all we can do. We need like everybody's welcome in the table of like cultural creation, cultural like creating and like shaping culture and transmuting culture and like making culture more resonant. Everybody's welcome to that table. And some things are going to take and some things aren't. And it's all good. I want to turn it to Gina Ali. So I'm going to pin you, Gina, just a heads up. And they are going to speak about a resource. Hey, they're going to speak about a resource that we have been developing. And so let me toss it to you. And then we're going to close. So we're almost done, folks.
Yeah, hi, salam, everyone. Thank you all, Shenaaz, Anum, Urooj, everyone that's here in the space. It's just really nice to be in community and like fill it up, especially before Ramadan, whatever that means for everybody here. So yeah, the workbook, Shenaaz, myself, others within the organization have been working really hard to kind of put together this resource that can tag along the movie and also kind of be a part of maybe like a toolkit you might even be building for yourself, like a healing toolkit, which could be really supportive to a lot of folks, especially for queer and trans Muslim folks. So some of the themes that are in the workbook actually is, grief, reconciliation, reparenting, family roles, and then kind of adding in some resources within there to help support you if anything were to come up. And just a space for y'all to really like jot down feelings and practices and things that you can start to incorporate into your day-to-day life. And I'm now the healing justice coordinator with QueerCrescent, so folks can always send an email needing like clarification or anything of that sort. And then tomorrow, hopefully, inshallah, we're going to be doing like a sort of debrief process space for folks who have like any feelings that might have come up or just kind of wanting a little bit extra support with the film, because I know that there can be a lot of complex feelings and I'm kind of like a natural critical thinker also. So I always like to think about like all the scopes. So like some things might not have resonated with folks or with the movie, or things might have come up that are like a little bit conflicting, and there's always room for us to talk about that and to kind of expand it so that we can all feel supported and welcomed, within these spaces and these conversations. Was there anything else, Shenaaz, that you feel like I should add or contribute?
You're just fabulous. So thank you, Gina Lee, and I now say your full name.
Go for it. It is my
we watched the film a couple weeks ago. I ugly cried, and then we put together this workbook. And if you haven't already followed Gina on TikTok, they're like Decolonized Therapist Sensation. But we really put like, we both also wear hats as like mental health therapists. And so we put some thinking into this workbook to really support people, because the film, I think it will continue to unfold. And so we really invite folks to join us tomorrow and to engage with the workbook and yourself in the feelings, and know that we're here to keep loving on you through it all. With that, beautiful folks, I think we're going to call it. Thank you so much, Anum, Urooj, Faraz from afar. We felt you here. I'm sad you weren't here, but I felt you. Gina, Rafa, Vivek, Dalia, all the folks that helped make tonight possible. Masjid folks, Ananas, Hidayah folks, everybody, thank you so much for making tonight possible. Hala, appreciate you. Much love, blessings, protection for your Ramzan ahead. Do we want to do any last words or close out? We'll just do a circle and pass it to you, Urooj.
Oh, thank you. Yes, very, very grateful for this space. It's been a while since I've been taking a little bit of a step back with LGBTQ Muslim stuff. So just feeling really grateful to be, asked to be pulled back in Shenaaz, and, lots of love to you, and so cool to meet folks and to see community that I haven't in a long time. So thanks all. Lots of love.
Yeah, this was so sweet. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I wish we, like, all 46 of us could now hang out in a space together. That would be such a great next step, but hopefully in the near future, something like that can happen. But thanks everyone for attending and sharing the space.
Gina, any last words for our group?
Thank you, and really holding everyone very close. And I can't wait for more community gatherings and opportunities to really expand these conversations, inshallah.
Indeed. All right, y'all. Good night. Peace, blessings.
Okay.